Evan had spent 18 years believing he was the heir to the Han family. The Han name opened doors. It appeared on the walls of their company headquarters, on charity foundations, and across business magazines. And one day, Evan was expected to inherit all of it. His father had always told him the same thing. You were born to carry the Han name. Evan believed him. Until his 18th birthday. The celebration was supposed to be perfect. A massive ballroom had been decorated with flowers and crystal lights. Business partners filled the room, while reporters waited outside for photographs of the Han family's future heir. Evan stood beside his parents, smiling for the cameras. Then his father received a phone call. His expression changed. "Excuse me." He walked away. A few minutes later, the family doctor entered the room. Behind him was a young man Evan had never seen before. The stranger was dressed simply, looking uncomfortable among the wealthy guests. Their eyes met. For some reason, Evan felt an immediate sense of unease. The doctor approached Evan's father. "Chairman Han, the DNA results are confirmed." The room went silent. Evan's smile disappeared. "What results?" His father looked at him. For the first time in Evan's life, he saw fear in his father's eyes. The doctor slowly continued. "Evan is not your biological son." Someone gasped. Evan stared at him. "What?" His mother covered her mouth. The stranger stepped forward. The doctor turned toward him. "And this is Ji-ho." He looked at Evan. "Ji-ho is your biological son." Evan felt as though the entire room had tilted. No, couldn't be true. He looked at his mother. "Mom." She couldn't answer. His father finally spoke. "There's been a mistake." The doctor shook his head. "We repeated the test 3 times. Evan looked at Ji-ho. The person standing across from him wasn't just a stranger. He was the biological son the Han family had unknowingly been searching for. The real heir. And suddenly, everything Evan had spent 18 years building seemed to disappear. That night, Evan stood alone in his bedroom. The photographs on the walls showed birthdays, holidays, school ceremonies, and family celebrations. He had always thought they represented his life. Now they felt like evidence of someone else's. A knock came at the door. His mother entered. "Evan." He turned away. "Am I still your son?" She froze. "Of course." "Then why does it feel like everything changed in one day?" She had no answer. Downstairs, he could hear voices. His father was speaking to Ji-ho. The real son, the heir, the person who had unknowingly taken the place Evan had occupied for 18 years. Evan closed his eyes. For the first time, he wondered what would happen tomorrow. Would his parents look at Ji-ho the way they had always looked at him? Would they still call him their son? Would there still be a place for him in the Han family? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. The life Evan thought belonged to him was no longer his alone. Please subscribe to Sweet Tales and like this video. The morning after the DNA results, the Han mansion felt like a completely different place. For 18 years, I had walked through those halls without thinking about where I belonged. Now every room reminded me that someone else had a claim to my life. Ji-ho had been given the guest room beside my parents' suite. By breakfast, his place at the table had already been prepared. My mother smiled at him. "Ji-ho, I made the breakfast you liked when you were younger." I looked down at my plate. She had never asked me what I wanted that morning. I hated myself for noticing, and I hated the jealousy even more. "Are you okay, Evan?" she asked. "I'm fine." Ji-ho looked at me. He seemed uncomfortable too. "I don't want to take anything from you." I laughed quietly. "You already took everything." The table fell silent. My father frowned. "Evan." I pushed my chair back. "Sorry." I left before anyone could see my eyes watering. For the next few weeks, the family tried to make things normal. It wasn't. Every conversation seemed to become a competition. My father asked Ji-ho about his plans for university. My mother bought him new clothes. The family lawyers began explaining his future position in the company. And whenever I entered the room, conversations became quieter. One afternoon, I found Ji-ho studying the company documents in the library. "You really want to become the heir?" I asked. He looked up. I don't know. That's convenient. His expression hardened. You think this is easy for me? I didn't answer. I grew up believing my parents were someone else. He continued. Yesterday, I found out my entire life was based on a mistake. He closed the folder. You think I wanted this? I looked away. No. Then stop treating me like your enemy. His words stayed with me, because the truth was, I didn't know whether Jiho was my enemy, but I knew I was terrified of losing my family. That evening, my father called us both into his study. He placed 2 documents on the desk. The board has decided that Jiho will eventually become the legal heir. My chest tightened. But Evan will remain part of this family. I looked at my father. What does that mean? You will receive shares in the company and financial protection. I almost laughed. Financial protection? My voice shook. I don't want money. My father stared at me. Then what do you want? I swallowed. I want to know that I'm still your son. His expression softened. Before he could answer, Jiho spoke. He should have that. Everyone turned toward him. Jiho looked at my father. Being your biological son doesn't make him less of a son. For the first time since the DNA results, I didn't know what to say to him. Later that night, I found Jiho standing alone on the balcony. Thank you, I said. He turned around. For what? What you said earlier. He smiled faintly. I meant it. The city lights reflected in his eyes. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said quietly, maybe we're both fighting for the same thing. What? To feel like we belong somewhere. I looked toward the mansion behind us. For the first time, I wondered if Jiho understood me better than anyone else did. Neither of us knew it yet, but the rivalry between the 2 heirs was only beginning. The next morning, the news was everywhere. Han family confirms biological heir after 18 years. My photograph appeared beside Jiho's. Mine was captioned, Evan Han, former heir. His read, Jiho Han, biological heir. Former heir. 2 words that hurt more than I expected. I stared at the newspaper while eating breakfast. My father entered the dining room. Evan. I folded the newspaper. Good morning. He sat across from me. The board meeting is today. I already knew what he was going to say. They want Jiho introduced to the shareholders. I nodded. And me? He hesitated. You don't have to attend. I looked at him. Because I'm no longer useful? His expression tightened. That's not what I said. But it's what everyone is thinking. My mother entered quietly. Evan, please. I stood. I need some air. The garden was the only place where nobody followed me. I sat beneath the old tree near the fountain. For 18 years, I'd believed this was my future. The company, the family, the name, everything. Now I wasn't even sure what belonged to me. Footsteps approached. Jiho. He stopped several feet away. I brought you something. He held out a small envelope. I didn't take it. What is it? My university acceptance letter. I looked at him. Why are you showing me? Because I don't want to take your place. I laughed bitterly. You already have. Jiho lowered his eyes. I know. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I don't want us to hate each other because of something neither of us chose. His words surprised me. I finally took the envelope. Maybe we can't decide what our parents do. He looked at me. But we can decide what we do. I nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first time I felt like we weren't fighting each other. We were fighting the situation. That afternoon, the board meeting began. I stayed upstairs. Through the balcony doors, I could see reporters gathered outside the mansion. Jiho stood beside my father. He looked nervous. My father placed a hand on his shoulder. The cameras flashed. Something inside me twisted. That had been my place. For 18 years. Then I heard my mother's voice behind me. Evan. I turned. She was holding an old photograph. I found this in the attic. It showed 2 newborn babies lying beside each other in a hospital nursery. 2 identical bracelets were visible around their tiny wrists. I frowned. Those are us. She nodded. Yes. I studied the photograph. Something didn't make sense. Mom, why are there two bracelets? Her expression changed. I don't know. Before I could ask anything else, she took the photograph back. Forget about it. But I couldn't, because written on the back of the photograph was a date. And underneath it were 3 words. Hospital. St. Mary's. I looked toward the window. Downstairs, Ji-ho was surrounded by reporters. For the first time, I wondered whether the DNA results were really the whole story. Maybe we hadn't simply been switched. Maybe someone had wanted us switched. And if that was true, the truth about who we really were had only just begun. The photograph wouldn't leave my mind. 2 babies, 2 bracelets, 1 hospital, St. Mary's. I spent most of the night staring at the image on my desk. If Ji-ho and I had truly been switched at birth, then how had it happened? And why? The next morning, I went looking for my mother. She was in the library, speaking quietly with my father. When they noticed me, the conversation stopped. What's going on? I asked. My father sighed. We've contacted St. Mary's. My heart skipped. And they still have archived records from the year you and Ji-ho were born. I stepped closer. Then let's see them. My father hesitated. There's something you should know. He placed an old folder on the desk. Your birth records were altered. I stared at him. What? The hospital's original registry lists 2 male infants born within minutes of each other. One was recorded as the Han family's child. And the other? My father looked at me. His identity was never properly registered. A cold feeling settled in my chest. You're saying someone erased one of us? We don't know yet. Later that afternoon, Ji-ho found me in the garden. I heard about the records. I looked at him. You knew. My parents told me. I frowned. You call them your parents? He smiled sadly. They raised me for 18 years. I immediately regretted the question. Sorry. It's okay. He sat on the bench beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I don't want to replace you. I looked at him. And I don't want to hate you. He smiled faintly. Then maybe we should stop fighting. I laughed. You're suggesting peace? Temporary peace. How temporary? Until we figure out who ruined both our lives. For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. Deal. That evening, my father made an announcement. The Han Group board had formally recognized Ji-ho as the biological heir. The press gathered outside the mansion. Cameras flashed as Ji-ho stepped forward. I watched from inside. Part of me still hurt, but another part felt relieved. At least now he wouldn't have to wonder where he belonged. Then my father walked toward the cameras. There is one more announcement. I looked up. Evan will remain a member of the Han family and will continue his education under the family's support. Reporters immediately began shouting questions. Does this mean Evan has been disinherited? Will Evan leave the company? Does the Han family regret raising him? I expected my father to ignore them. Instead, he said firmly, Evan is my son. Biology does not erase 18 years of family. My eyes widened. For the first time since the truth came out, I felt like I could breathe again. That night, Ji-ho knocked on my bedroom door. Come in. He stepped inside. Your father means what he said. I know. He looked around my room. You really grew up here? Since I was 6. He smiled. It must feel strange. It does. He looked at the old photographs on my shelf. I never had anything like this. I turned toward him. What do you mean? My family moved around a lot. I never had a permanent room. I realized then that while I had been dreaming about becoming the perfect Han heir, Ji-ho had spent 18 years wishing for the kind of home I had taken for granted. Maybe neither of us had gotten the life we were supposed to have. Maybe we'd both been searching for the same thing, place to belong. And somewhere between the rivalry and the resentment, we had begun to understand each other. The discovery at St. Mary's changed everything. For the first time, Evan and Ji-ho were no longer simply trying to understand who had been raised in the wrong family. They were beginning to suspect that someone had deliberately changed their identities. The following morning, Chairman Han called an emergency meeting. A hospital representative placed several old documents on the table. Most of the records from that year were destroyed during a fire, she explained. But one document survived. She handed over a sealed envelope. Evan looked at Ji-ho. Neither of them moved. Finally, Ji-ho opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the original maternity ward register. 2 births were recorded only 11 minutes apart. Baby a male Han family. Baby B male. Identity withheld. Evan's hands tightened around the paper. Identity withheld? The hospital representative nodded. Someone specifically requested that the second child's information be sealed. Who? Ji-ho asked. She hesitated. We don't know. Then Evan noticed something at the bottom of the page. A signature. His father's name. He looked up. Why did my father sign this? The room went silent. Chairman Han stared at the document. I didn't. Evan's heart sank. Then who did? That evening, Evan confronted his father. You told us the switch was an accident. I believed it was. But your signature is on the original record. His father looked genuinely shocked. That's impossible. He took the document and examined it carefully. Then his expression changed. This isn't my signature. Evan frowned. Someone forged it? His father nodded. And whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Ji-ho stepped into the room. Then we need to find that person. For once, Evan agreed immediately. Later that night, Evan found Ji-ho outside the mansion. The two stood overlooking the city. We've spent weeks fighting over who belongs in this family, Ji-ho said. Evan nodded. And now we're both trying to find out who took our identities. Maybe that's what we should focus on. Evan looked at him. Together. Ji-ho smiled slightly. Together. Neither of them knew where the investigation would lead. But for the first time, they weren't competing for the Han family's affection. They had a common goal. And somewhere in Seoul, someone was desperately trying to make sure they never discovered the truth. The investigation continued in secret. Evan and Ji-ho spent the following week searching through old hospital records, family documents, and photographs. Every clue seemed to create another question. Then Ji-ho discovered something hidden inside an old photo album. Evan. Evan looked up. Ji-ho held a photograph in his hands. It showed 2 newborn babies in the St. Mary's nursery. On the back was a handwritten message. Do not let the Han family discover baby B. Evan's face went pale. Who wrote that? I don't know. A second piece of paper fell from the album. Contained a name. Kang Min-suk. Evan recognized it immediately. That's my father's former secretary. Ji-ho stared at him. Where is he now? Nobody knows. That evening, Evan confronted his father. Did Kang Min-suk know about the switch? His father became silent. Where did you hear that name? So he did know. Chairman Han sat down heavily. Min-suk worked for me 20 years ago. What happened to him? He disappeared shortly after you were born. Evan exchanged a glance with Ji-ho. Why? His father shook his head. I never found out. Then he opened an old drawer and removed a small envelope. I kept this because I thought it might eventually matter. Inside was a photograph of Min-suk standing outside St. Mary's Hospital. Beside him was a woman neither Evan nor Ji-ho recognized. On the back was a date, May 14, 2006, the exact day they were born. Later, Evan and Ji-ho sat on the mansion's balcony, looking over the city. For once, neither spoke about inheritance. I used to think you were the reason I lost my place here, Evan said. Ji-ho looked at him. And I thought you were the reason I never got to know my real family. They both fell silent. Maybe we were both wrong, Ji-ho said. Evan nodded. Neither of them knew what the future held. But they had stopped seeing each other as rivals. They were 2 people caught in the same mystery, determined to uncover the truth about the lives that had been taken from them. Then Evan's phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. He answered. A distorted voice spoke only one sentence. Stop searching for Min-suk. The call ended. Evan slowly lowered the phone. Jiho stood. Who was it? Evan looked toward the dark city. Someone who doesn't want us to find him. And somewhere across Seoul, an unknown figure watched the Han mansion from a parked car. The mysterious phone call changed the investigation. Evan and Jiho agreed not to tell anyone about the threat. Not even the family. The next morning, they returned to the old photograph they had found in the family archives. The man standing outside St. Mary's Hospital was clearly Kang Min-suk. But the woman beside him was still unidentified. Jiho enlarged the photograph on his phone. Look at her necklace. Evan leaned closer. A small silver pendant hung around her neck. I've seen that before. Where? Evan thought for a moment. My mother's old jewelry box. They immediately went upstairs. Evan's mother was away at a charity event, so they searched the study. Inside the jewelry box was a matching silver pendant. Evan stared at it. This can't be a coincidence. Underneath the pendant was a folded note. He opened it carefully. Only one sentence was written. If the boys are ever separated, find Min-suk before the Han family does. Evan's heart sank. Someone knew this would happen. That afternoon, they contacted a private investigator. Within hours, he discovered something unexpected. Kang Min-suk hadn't disappeared. He had been living under another name in a small coastal town. But before they could leave, the investigator called again. There's a problem. What? Someone reached him before you did. Evan froze. Who? We don't know. Is he safe? A pause. His house was empty. That evening, Evan and Jiho returned to the mansion. The front door was open. Neither of them had left it that way. They entered cautiously. Nothing appeared to be missing. Then Evan noticed something on the dining table. A photograph. It showed two newborn babies. On the back, someone had written, "You are looking in the wrong place." Jiho turned the photograph over again. There's something else. A small number was written beneath the message. 417. Evan stared at it. Room 417? Maybe. Or a locker. Jiho looked toward him. Then that's where we go next. Neither of them realized that the number 417 would lead them much closer to the truth than either of them expected. The number 417 led Evan and Jiho to an abandoned wing of St. Mary's Hospital. The building had been closed for years, but the old floor plans confirmed that room 417 had once been part of the maternity ward. Evan held the photograph tightly. This is where it happened. Jiho looked at the faded door. Then maybe this is where we'll find out why. Inside, the room was almost completely empty. Dust covered the floor. An old metal cabinet stood against the wall. Jiho opened it. Nothing. Then Evan noticed something underneath the loose floorboard. Jiho. They lifted it together. Beneath it was a small metal box. Inside were three things: an old hospital identification card, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter. The name on the identification card was Kang Min-suk, Administrative Secretary. Evan opened the letter. If you are reading this, the truth has survived. The letter explained that Min-suk had discovered irregularities in the maternity records shortly after the twins were born. Someone had deliberately switched the children's identification bracelets. But Min-suk had never discovered who ordered it. He had hidden copies of the evidence in room 417 because he feared for his life. Evan looked at Jiho. So someone deliberately switched us. Jiho nodded. But why? Before they could continue, footsteps echoed in the hallway. They froze. Someone was outside. The door handle slowly moved. Evan quickly grabbed the evidence. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the man whispered, "You're Kang Min-suk's sons." Evan's eyes widened. "Who are you?" The stranger looked at the USB drive in Evan's hand. "Someone who has been waiting 18 years for you to find that." Then he turned and disappeared down the corridor. Jiho ran after him. But the hallway was empty. Only a small envelope remained on the floor. Evan picked it up. Written across the front were 4 words. The switch was ordered. Inside was a photograph of 3 people. Kang Min-suk, Chairman Han, and a third person whose face had been deliberately scratched out. Evan stared at the photograph. The mystery had just become much bigger. Someone in their family had known the truth from the beginning, and they had spent 18 years hiding it. The photograph from room 417 changed everything. Evan couldn't stop staring at the scratched-out face. Someone had deliberately erased the identity of the third person. But why? And why were Chairman Han and Kang Min-suk standing beside them? Back at the mansion, Evan and Ji-ho connected the USB drive to an old computer. Most of the files were damaged. One folder, however, opened successfully. May 14, 2006, maternity records. Inside were scanned documents, photographs, and a short audio recording. They played it. Kang Min-suk's voice filled the room. If anything happens to me, the person responsible is not Chairman Han. Evan and Ji-ho looked at each other. The recording continued. The order came from someone much closer to the family. Then the recording ended. Evan's heart pounded. Someone closer to the family. Ji-ho looked at the photograph again. There are only a few people who could have had access to the hospital records. Evan suddenly remembered something. The woman. What woman? The woman standing beside Min-suk. He opened his mother's old jewelry box and pulled out the silver pendant. There was a tiny symbol engraved on its back. Ji-ho compared it with the photograph. It's the same. They searched the Han family archives for the symbol. After several minutes, Ji-ho found an old family document. The symbol belonged to Chairman Han's older sister, Han Soo-jin. Evan froze. His sister. Ji-ho nodded. She disappeared from the family years ago. Why? Before Ji-ho could answer, they heard footsteps. Chairman Han entered the room. He saw the photograph in Evan's hand. His face went pale. Where did you get that? Room 417. His father stared at the image. Then he whispered, Soo-jin. Evan stepped forward. You knew. His father closed his eyes. I knew she was involved. Involved in what? The night you were born. Later that evening, Evan sat alone on the balcony. Ji-ho joined him. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ji-ho said, Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not facing it alone. Evan looked at him. Why do you keep saying things like that? Because I mean them. For the first time, Evan realized how much had changed between them. They had started as strangers fighting over the same family. Now they trusted each other more than anyone else. Evan smiled faintly. Then tomorrow we find Soo-jin. Ji-ho nodded. Together. Neither of them knew that Soo-jin had already returned to Seoul, and she was waiting for them. After discovering the truth about the baby switch, Evan couldn't sleep. Too many things had changed. But one thing had become impossible to ignore. His feelings for Ji-ho. They had started as rivals. Then they became allies. Somewhere along the way, Ji-ho had become the person Evan trusted most. That evening, Evan found Ji-ho waiting on the rooftop. You disappeared, Ji-ho said. I needed to think. About what? Evan looked at him. About us. Ji-ho became quiet. Evan took a breath. I spent so long thinking you were taking my family away from me. I know. But now I realize you were never my enemy. Ji-ho stepped closer. Then what am I? Evan smiled nervously. Someone I don't want to lose. Ji-ho's expression softened. I've been afraid to say the same thing. The city lights shimmered behind them. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ji-ho gently reached for Evan's hand. Evan didn't pull away. I don't know what our future looks like, Ji-ho whispered. Neither do I. But I know I want you in it. Evan squeezed his hand. Then let's find out together. For the first time, neither of them had to fight for a place in anyone's family. They had chosen each other. The next morning, Ji-ho sent Evan a message. No family, no business, no reporters, just us. Evan smiled. Where are you taking me? You'll see. Ji-ho took him to a small cafe overlooking the river. It was nothing like the expensive restaurants they had grown up around. There were no cameras, no business executives, no expectations, just the two of them. Evan laughed. This is your idea of a romantic date? Jiho smiled. I wanted somewhere you could relax. They spent the afternoon talking about everything except the Han family. Evan discovered that Jiho loved old movies. Jiho discovered that Evan secretly hated formal dinners. They laughed more that afternoon than they had during the entire previous year. As the sun began to set, Jiho handed Evan a small box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet. I saw it and thought of you. Evan touched it carefully. Why? Because it's simple. Jiho smiled. And because you don't need the Han name to shine. Evan looked at him. You're becoming dangerously good at saying things like that. Is that a complaint? No. Evan smiled. It's definitely not a complaint. They walked beside the river as the evening lights came on. For once, there was no mystery to solve. No family scandal. No inheritance battle. Just two people beginning something new. 1 year later, everything had changed. Jiho had become a respected executive at Han Group. Evan had built his own creative company. Their relationship was no longer a secret from their closest friends and family. There had been difficult conversations. There had been arguments. There had even been moments when Evan wondered whether their complicated history would make their relationship impossible. But Jiho never gave up. One evening, he took Evan back to the rooftop where they had first confessed their feelings. The city stretched endlessly beneath them. I brought you here because I wanted to ask you something. Evan smiled. Should I be worried? Jiho laughed. No. He took Evan's hand. I spent my entire childhood believing I belonged somewhere else. Evan listened quietly. And you spent yours believing you had to earn your place. Jiho looked into his eyes. Neither of us has to do that anymore. He gave Evan a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of the two of them from their first date. On the back, Jiho had written, No more borrowed names. No more borrowed lives. Just us. Evan's eyes filled with tears. You really planned all this? Maybe. Evan laughed. You're impossible. Jiho smiled. And you still stayed. Of course I stayed. Evan held his hand. I chose you. Jiho leaned his forehead gently against Evan's. And I choose you. They stood together beneath the evening sky, no longer heirs fighting over a family legacy. They were simply Evan and Jiho, two people who had lost 18 years to a secret, but had found something neither of them had expected. A future they could choose together. The end. Please subscribe to Sweet Tales and like this video.